The night before the Blackwood family's 20th anniversary gala, Diane Blackwood's diamond necklace, priceless, irreplaceable, worn by her in every photograph the family still kept on display, vanished from the estate. There was only one problem. The security footage showed exactly one person entering that room that evening: Amelia Carter. Ethan confronted her in front of his entire assembled family. "Where is the necklace?" Amelia didn't deny entering the room. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled the necklace out, in full view of everyone. The room gasped. Ethan's voice turned cold. "You stole it." Amelia looked directly at him. "No, Mr. Blackwood." She turned the necklace over. Engraved on the back, 6 words Ethan had never seen before. "To Amelia, when the truth comes out." Ethan went completely silent. The handwriting belonged to his mother, who had been dead for 12 years. The anniversary gala was the one night of the year the Blackwood family still gathered in full. Aunts, cousins, family friends who'd known Diane Blackwood personally. All of it organized around a portrait of her that hung in the main hall. Diane's necklace was kept in a locked display case in what the family still called her room, a study nobody had fully repurposed in 12 years, kept almost exactly as she'd left it. The necklace itself had a history longer than Ethan's own memory of his mother. A gift from his grandfather to Diane on her wedding day, the one piece of jewelry she'd worn to nearly every important moment of her adult life. That evening, when Ethan's aunt went to retrieve the necklace for the traditional toast, the case was empty. No forced entry, no broken glass, just an empty case, and a house full of people who all, within minutes, wanted the same answer. Diane had worn that necklace exactly once a year, every anniversary since Ethan was a boy, and exactly once a year since her death, someone in the family wore it in her place. This year, it was meant to be Ethan's turn. Security was called in immediately, quietly, before any of the arriving guests could notice. The head of household security pulled the footage within the hour. It showed, with total clarity, a single figure entering Diane's study at 6:42 that evening, opening the display case, and leaving 4 minutes later. Amelia Carter. No mask, no hesitation, no attempt to avoid the camera she clearly knew was there. Whoever reviewed the footage first brought it straight to Ethan, expecting outrage. What they got instead was something closer to disbelief. Amelia had worked in that house for 4 years. She had access to nearly every room in it, including that one, though almost nobody used that access, out of a quiet, unspoken respect for the one space in Blackwood Estate everyone still treated as sacred. Which was exactly what made the footage so difficult for Ethan to reconcile. Amelia, of all people, understood that unspoken rule better than anyone in the house. She'd never once entered that room before, not in 4 years, until tonight. Ethan called her into the main hall, in front of nearly 40 guests, the portrait of his mother looking down over all of it. "Where is the necklace?" he demanded. Amelia didn't deny entering the room. She didn't offer an excuse either. "I have it," she said simply. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps. A few sharp intakes of breath. Someone's champagne glass forgotten mid-air. A cousin near the back whispered something to her husband. Someone else reached for their phone before catching themselves. 40 people, all of them suddenly certain they were about to remember this exact moment for the rest of their lives. "You admit it," Ethan said, his voice dropping into something colder than Amelia had ever heard from him. "In front of my entire family." "I admit I have it," Amelia said. "I never said I stole it." Aunt Patricia stepped forward from the crowd, her hand pressed to her chest in a display of shock that struck Amelia, even in that moment, as slightly too composed to be entirely genuine. "Ethan, darling, what more proof do you need?" Patricia said. "She was seen. She admits it. Call the police and let's not ruin the evening any further than it already has been." "I took the box," Amelia said, steady, unhurried, apparently unbothered by 40 pairs of eyes and the growing murmur of the room. "I didn't steal what's inside it." "That's the same thing," Ethan said. "It isn't," Amelia said. "Not even close. And I think, by the end of tonight, you'll agree with me." Someone in the crowd suggested calling security. Ethan raised a hand, silencing the room without quite meaning to. Patricia's voice cut through again, sharper this time. "Ethan, she's manipulating you. This is exactly the kind of theatrical nonsense." "Let her finish," Ethan said, cutting his aunt off for the first time in longer than either of them could remember. It was a small thing, but it was the first crack in an evening that was about to come apart entirely. Amelia reached into her pocket and drew out the necklace itself, Diane Blackwood's diamonds, catching the same chandelier light they'd caught in 100 old photographs. The room went utterly silent. "It's real," Ethan said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. It's real," Amelia confirmed, "and it was never meant to stay in that case forever." "What does that mean?" Amelia turned the necklace over in her hand, studying the back of it for a moment before holding it out for him to see. Patricia's composure, for the briefest moment, slipped, a tightening around her eyes that nobody else in the room seemed to notice. Amelia noticed. She'd been trained, over 4 years, to notice exactly that kind of thing. "Read it," Amelia said, holding the necklace out toward Ethan. Ethan took the necklace with hands that weren't entirely steady. 6 words, engraved in small, careful script along the inside curve of the clasp. "To Amelia, when the truth comes out." He read it 3 times before he trusted himself to say anything. "This is my mother's handwriting," he said. "Yes," Amelia said. "My mother has been dead for 12 years. "Yes," Amelia said again. "I know exactly how long it's been, Mr. Blackwood. I've been waiting almost that entire time." Ethan's hands closed around the necklace, the diamonds cold against his palm. 12 years of grief he'd never fully let himself feel arriving all at once, in front of 40 people who suddenly felt very far away. Somewhere behind him, he heard his aunt's voice, thinner now, less certain. "Ethan, I really don't think this is the time." "No," Ethan said, not turning around. "I think this is exactly the time." Ethan called the family's longtime attorney, Mr. Doyle, before the guests had even fully dispersed, and had him at the estate within the hour. Doyle examined the engraving carefully, then compared it, on the spot, against 3 decades of documents in Diane Blackwood's own hand, still archived in the estate's files. "It's hers," Doyle confirmed, without question. "How is that possible?" Ethan asked. "She died 12 years ago. Amelia would have been a teenager." "I don't know the how yet," Doyle admitted, "but the handwriting isn't in question. Your mother wrote this." Doyle had handled the Blackwood family's affairs for over 30 years. In all that time, he admitted quietly to Ethan afterward, there had always been one small, unresolved item in Diane's private files, a sealed instruction, dated the year before her death, that he'd never been authorized to open. "I assumed it was sentimental," Doyle said. "A letter to you, perhaps, for when you were older. I never imagined it involved anyone outside the family." What the sealed file revealed, once Doyle finally opened it that night with Ethan's permission, went back further than anyone in the room had expected. In the year before her death, Diane Blackwood had grown quietly convinced that something inside the family's own financial structure was deeply wrong, money moving in patterns that made sense to almost no one except the person who understood every account intimately. She'd begun her own private investigation, careful and methodical, telling almost no one, except a sharp young accountant she'd been quietly consulting with, off the books, a man named Thomas Carter. Amelia's father. Thomas had been recommended to Diane by a mutual acquaintance at her charity work, a quiet, unassuming man with a reputation for finding the one number in a spreadsheet that didn't belong. Diane liked that about him immediately. Diane had approached Thomas directly, specifically because he had no formal ties to the company and no reason to protect anyone inside it. She trusted him precisely because he was an outsider. Thomas died before he could finish what Diane had asked of him. And within months, grief and a long illness she'd kept quiet from nearly everyone took Diane too, before she ever got the chance to finish it herself. She left the necklace and the message with the one person she trusted to eventually pick up exactly where Thomas had been forced to stop. The file also contained something Doyle had genuinely never expected to find: notes, in Diane's own hand, naming a specific person she'd grown suspicious of in her final months. Patricia, Ethan's aunt, his mother's own sister. The woman who had, for 12 years, been the closest thing to a mother he had left. Diane's notes were careful, not yet conclusive. Questions about specific transfers out of the family's charitable foundation. Discrepancies Patricia had always explained away smoothly, easily, the way Patricia explained everything. Patricia had never married, never had children of her own. The Blackwood Foundation, and by extension the Blackwood family, had become, over the years, the closest thing she had to either. Diane hadn't lived long enough to finish asking those questions. Patricia had spent 12 years making sure nobody else did either. It was Patricia who had comforted a 14-year-old Ethan at his mother's funeral. Patricia who had shown up to every school event, every holiday, every hard year after that, filling a space nobody else had tried to fill. It made the discovery almost impossible for Ethan to hold in his hands. Not because it wasn't convincing, because it was. Ethan asked Doyle to quietly pull 12 years of foundation records that same night. It took less than 2 hours to find what Diane, in her final months, had only begun to suspect. "Why did you take the job here?" Ethan asked her later that night, once the house had finally emptied. 4 years ago. Why this house?" "Your father asked me to," Amelia said. "Not directly at first. He reached out to my family not long after your mother died, and eventually, once I was old enough, he offered me a position here. He never told me everything. He told me enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to know that someone needed to be inside this house who wasn't afraid of anyone in it," Amelia said. "Your father couldn't watch everyone at once. He needed someone who could." 4 years is a long time to wait for one night, Ethan said. "It was the night I judged it was finally safe enough to move," Amelia said. "Your mother's note said, when the truth comes out. I've spent 4 years deciding when that actually was. Tonight, with Whitfield gone and Julian finally safe, I judged the house quiet enough to risk it." Buried deeper in Diane's sealed file, Ethan found what he hadn't expected. Actual evidence, incomplete but real, that Thomas Carter had gathered in his final weeks. Bank records, handwritten notes, enough to show a clear, years-long pattern of funds diverted from the Blackwood Family Foundation into accounts Patricia controlled personally. Diane had kept it hidden, waiting for enough proof to be certain before she confronted her own sister. She never got the chance. Amelia had known the file existed for years. She'd never opened it herself. Diane's instructions had been specific. It wasn't hers to use until the necklace found its way to daylight first. "You had proof for years," Ethan said, "and you waited." "I had a sealed instruction from a dead woman I never met," Amelia said. "I wasn't going to guess at what she meant and get it wrong. She waited until she was certain. I did the same." Ethan found Patricia the next morning, in the sunroom she'd claimed as her own years earlier, and set the file down in front of her without a word. She looked at it for a long moment before she spoke. "I gave you a childhood after your mother died," Patricia said quietly. "Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counted for everything," Ethan said. "Right up until I found out you spent 12 years stealing from her memory to do it." "I told myself it was borrowed," Patricia said, "that I'd put it back eventually, then eventually became never, and never became easier, every year I didn't get caught." "Did my mother know? Before she died?" "She suspected," Patricia said. "I don't think she was certain. I made sure of that, every time she asked a question I didn't like." "You could have told me," Ethan said. "Any point in 12 years, you could have come to me." "And said what?" Patricia asked. "That your mother suspected me before she died, and that she was right? You'd worshipped her for 12 years by the time you were old enough to really understand what losing her meant. I couldn't be the one who took the rest of her away from you too." Ethan sat with that for a long moment, the possibility that his mother had spent her final months quietly afraid of her own sister and had never told him. "The foundation gets audited properly, starting today," he said, "and you're done pretending you did any of this for me." Patricia resigned from every position she'd held in the family's charitable work within the week, quietly, before the foundation's board could force the issue publicly. Ethan wore the necklace's story differently than he expected to, not as a scandal, as something closer to a gift, 12 years late, finally arriving. He found Amelia in the kitchen a few nights later, the way he always seemed to find her. The one room in the house, neither of them had ever needed a reason to be in. "I spent 4 years thinking I needed to figure out who you were protecting," he said. "It never once occurred to me that you weren't the one who needed protecting at all." Amelia didn't answer right away. "Your mother didn't choose me because I needed saving, Mr. Blackwood," she finally said. "She chose me because she needed someone who wouldn't stop until the truth actually came out. I just did what she asked." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way he'd only recently learned how to. "Then I suppose I owe her one more thing," he said. "Figuring out who you actually are, now that the truth finally has." Amelia almost smiled. Sometimes the person quietly serving your family isn't hiding from your past. Sometimes she's the one your family chose, long before you ever noticed her, to make sure the truth outlived everyone who tried to bury it.